Welcome to Beyond the Fine Print, the podcast where we help you simplify the ever-evolving world of commercial laws and technology and answer the major questions facing lawyers today. I'm your host, Rory O'Keefe, and in each episode, we'll be breaking through the jargon so you can stay ahead, keep it cool, and take control back. Now let's get started. Today, we're talking about equity, artificial intelligence, access to justice, social mobility, and what it takes to lead with purpose in a world that's changing faster than your phone's privacy settings. Today's guest broke barriers and then built bridges. Stephanie Boyce was the 177th president of the Law Society of England and Wales, the first person of colour, first black office holder, sixth woman, and only the second in-house solicitor in 50 years to lead the profession. Now that sounds like a lot of firsts, because it is. Stephanie basically walked into the legal profession and said, "I'll take some of everything, thanks." But her story didn't start in the boardroom. She was born in England to Caribbean parents. She grew up in a council estate to a single parent household and moved to the US as a teenager, and then saw the errors of ways and came back to the UK to study law and qualified in 2002. Let's just listen to this, because this isn't just a story about making history. It's about reshaping it. Stephanie, welcome. I'm genuinely honoured to have you here.
Thank you.
So let's start. Okay, let's start with the equity lens to all of this, because it's in everybody's mission statements. It's on LinkedIn banners. It's probably tattooed on somebody's forearm somewhere. But there is a huge difference, and we've talked about this previously, and I really enjoy hearing your thoughts on this, because it's a question of what real equity looks like today and how, or if we are actually really making progress. So we're not talking about just posting about it. It's not just talking about inclusion, but you're actually talking about having the right changing structures in place to get this right. So I'm just curious now. So what do you think real equity now looks today?
Well, I mean, firstly, I thought we, the legal profession, the solicitor profession, was doing quite well, actually, until I read that the LSB the Legal Services Board is about to produce a report that talks about the failing multiple levels that needs to be addressed around diversity issues in respect of the legal profession. And actually, it still remains an elitist profession that is hard to access. And of course, that for me makes hard reading because of the work that I did during my tenure and the work I continue to do. But real equity for me, it looks beyond merit. And I know we've moved away in some spaces from equity, diversity, inclusion, or equality, diversity, and inclusion to talking about meritocracy and about merit. And I have no issue with merit. The difficulty I have with merit is that it's not being applied equitably. And that's the difference that I think that actually around those performative statements that we've spoken about, the tick box exercises, but actually, if we are to narrow the gap or build those bridges, then we have to truly look at what equity looks like. And sometimes that means treating people differently in order to treat them equally.
That begs the question, though. Do you have any examples of what you mean?
So, for instance, the solicitor apprenticeship scheme is a good example where those who perhaps don't want to go to university or even can't afford to go to university have an opportunity to access the profession that way. But also, it's around the opportunities that are available. One of the things that I've said, Rory, about becoming president or an office holder of the Law Society was that I went through doors that I didn't even know were there. Invited into rooms I would never have been invited into. And it shouldn't be because I went to a particular school, was educated in a particular way, or because I belong to a particular network that I should know where those doors are, or I should be invited into those rooms. It should be skills. It should be aptitude. There should be, and of course we all tap into our networks. We all tap into that code, if you like, as to where we feel we belong. But for far too many of us, there are hidden barriers, seen and unseen, that get in the way. And far too often, the road to senior positions have been too narrow and inaccessible to those who are not in the know or in the right rooms.
That leads to the obvious question around this, the old-fashioned and falling into a tick box on a number of categories. You got the old boys club is the usual mantra. But then it's interesting how you talk about the doors that you didn't know where they were. It's kind of like one of those special mazes. You're not too sure this is a real door or not a door. You didn't know that they were there. So we always like to believe that leaders are true leaders if instead of bringing the ladder up they leave the ladder for others to follow, and they make it easier for others to follow after you. Do you think with the shift, and not going into the details around the geopolitical changes right now, around the support or otherwise, or the change or evolution in DEI, IND, or whatever we call it now, do we think that we have made things better for those coming through now? Or what kind of work can companies, and most of my listeners now will be in-house lawyers, so they're within a bigger company that may or may not have been very supportive of these conversations, but now some of them would have them just as part of their policies, or as part of a PowerPoint, but not necessarily as part of an initiative. So my question is more of, how do you find what these doors are? Who do you lean on? Like you yourself, if I'm correct, you put yourself forward for president.
Absolutely,
4
yes.
times? Yeah. So for anybody listening, it wasn't an
overnight success.
Perfection and all the way through.
It was an overnight success. It was the longest night ever. But no, yeah.
and I really want people to know that it's not always easy. You have to work for it, and you have to shift whatever. But perhaps maybe I asked the question a different way. Was it because, and I don't need to go into the details of it, but was it because when you got to the 4th time or the 5th time, you realized where all the doors were that allowed you that access to take, top dog position?
No. So, and I'm still finding out where some of those doors are. So the thing about it is that, as I say, being president and office holder would allow me to navigate some of those doors, seen and unseen, better than previously, because it is you're invited into certain networks, into certain groups, organizations, clubs, livery companies, all sorts. And of course, my coming to office, I didn't belong to any of those livery companies, private members club, and so forth. Some of that, there's cost around that to become members. Some of it, you have to be invited. And subsequently, I've been invited to join organizations, groups that I've never even heard of. And probably to this day, couldn't even tell you how I got there. But other than through a network, somebody spoke my name in a room that I wasn't in. The difficulty, of course, is that I have been terribly troubled and disappointed to see the way that some of the law firms, organizations have rolled back on EDI, and the way that we have started renaming things on our website, repositioning things. And we still talk about, oh, yes, we're still doing EDI, but yet we don't talk about it, or we've cut the budget on it. We're not putting on as many events as previously. Now, the last time I looked, we as Great Britain was wholly distinct from other nations around the world, including those who have rolled back various EDI initiatives. And just because a country sneezes that we have to catch that cold, it means that we are a different melting pot. But slowly and surely, we're becoming, in my view, slightly fractured around discussing equality, diversity, and inclusion. We're pandering to some of this populist rhetoric around stereotypes. And that concerns me, that people are not thinking for themselves. And when we get into talking about AI and algorithms, that actually the discourse and the drivers of some of that discourse and those behaviors that social media is perpetuating in terms of how we interact with each other and how we view each other.
Well, let's dive into AI. You've mentioned it. Because AI is everywhere now, and from writing emails to recommending your TV shows and probably judging my playlists. But here's the thing: if we feed it biased data, we get biased outcomes. And I think we all know that over the last 2 years, when AI took off as a conversation topics for all our conferences and our newsletters from all the law firms, etc. So how do we build AI that doesn't reflect our flaws but helps us fix them?
So absolutely, you're correct in as much that, it's humans who are putting in the data. AI is a tool, and we shouldn't forget that it's a tool, it's there to assist. And of course, if the bias in AI isn't a glitch, it's a reflection of society, because we humans are putting into it our thoughts, our habits, our opinions, and so forth. And when embedded into legal systems, it has the power to amplify injustice at scale. And we've all seen some of the hallucinations that have gone on. We've all heard about facial recognition, not being able to recognize a certain skin color and so forth. But if we are to uphold the rule of law, especially in this country, we are immensely proud of the way we adhere to the rule of law. We must insist on transparency, accountability, and diverse data, because in a world where algorithm decides, and we've kind of handed over so much to algorithms, our silence becomes complicit if we do not speak up and call it out. And so I call myself an AI ethicist, that I'm there, as I keep telling people, lots of people are talking up the opportunities of AI. I'm there to talk up the risk. And I'm pleased to see more and more people talking about the risk, but I don't believe there is enough talking about it. We're handing over our data. Data is one of the most valuable things we've got. We're handing over that. Sometimes we don't even know we're handing over it. Some of the questions, you go onto a website, you're ordering something, why do they need to know? Depending on what site you're on. But I've seen too many places where they're asking questions that are not relevant to the transaction, but yet it is personal, sometimes sensitive data in order to complete that transaction. And what I would like to see is more guardrails, the government actually coming out and legislating. And I know there's bits of legislation that deals with bias and discrimination in the Equality Act, and we've got employment rights and so forth. But specific legislation that deals with some of the discourse that we are seeing coming out. And I know the government will say that we have laws that deal with social media providers taking down, harmful content. The difficulty is they're not doing it quick enough. And sometimes they're not doing it at all.
Arguably, they can't do it quick enough, because when you take a takedown order, then another account pops up doing the same thing. Then you have to go back to get another takedown order. So when do you stop? It's an ever revolving process for the courts. I always feel that it's a bit weighted in favour of the threat actor. Call it. I'm sure there's worse things to call them, but let's be kind. They may have put something up. I've seen it even just in my own practice. Trying to push for those kinds of changes, especially across social media, is hard if it's not within the four corners of the UK in order to do so. I would say, though, that the part which I was interested about the data point is that I say it before, and everybody who knows me knows I talk about bias, that there's different understandings of bias. So a bias to a lawyer is different to a bias to a data scientist, and a bias to a data ethicist. It's everybody comes to it differently, but it's the question in my head is like, how do we make sure that lived experience like yours isn't just the checkbox in a design process, but actually shapes the system? Do you know what I mean? It's like the question is, when we say security by design by default, privacy by design by default, people say, just all you need is a diverse team. And I said, no, because you may not be able to have a diverse team for whatever reason. You tried, but you only have the same look and feel and the same, education background, etc. But you need the people in that room to also ask the same questions, not just wait for somebody else under a particular checkbox that they would be required just to fulfill. I'm thinking of tokenism, thinking of all those things that we've had to deal with over the last number of years. So it's like, how can we shape the system more effectively?
That's one of the things I've always said, Rory. It's not enough to give a diverse person a seat at the table if you're not going to allow their voice to be heard or take their contribution as valid. And so what we know is in the technological area is that actually it's not terribly diverse. It's not representative of women. I think 26% of IT specialists are women, and the figure's even lower for those who come from an ethnic minority background. What we have to ensure is that those who are doing the data entry, programming, and so forth, that actually they are reflective of modern society. So they're not replicating their own opinions and biases, and that actually that every person, every characteristic, lived experience, and so forth has input into this technology, and that we're not purposely or not even thinking about it, excluding people from the table. So you take digital exclusion. We have a huge problem with digital exclusion in this country. And that's not just around the infrastructure, because huge swathes of this country, up and down this country, people still do not have access to the internet. Some places are reliant on things up in the sky that belong to a certain individual. But, most of us would like to think that we have reliable internet, but if it rains or we have a power cut, we're out. But then there's the episode around devices and the cost of powering those devices and the internet. And then, of course, skills. People who don't know, who are being left behind as we push more and more things online. People who are being pushed and excluded from this space because they don't know how to use it or they don't have the inclination to use it. And I saw a petition come across my inbox yesterday where they were talking about sign this petition because we want people to have the right to use cash if they want to and not be forced to use card payments because more and more shops are now moving towards cards. And so they're demanding that right. And that's one of the things that I've spoken out about is the NHS app, the push to move us into this, fully singing, functioning app. But we still need to retain the right to call up a doctor or the reception area and speak to a human person and say, I would like X, Y, and Z, rather than just being pushed online. And so to go back to the point about diversity in the room, it must replicate every corner of our society and indeed our world, because it's not just about what happens in that room, because it's global now. We have that reach now. But my concern is that we still don't have that representation. And if we compare that sometimes, Rory, to senior positions, we still do not have that replication, that representation of the diversity, the richness of diversity in our senior boardrooms, making decisions around the table that affects us all.
So when I'm thinking of these things, I'm thinking like tech, and I'm a huge fan of technology and evolving technologies, very much so. And I do think it has opened doors, but I do think it's also created divisions. Like we can digitize millions of cases, but if you don't have Wi-Fi, if I say that to my children, the world ends if you don't have Wi-Fi. But there's also literacy and there's also legal literacy as well that comes from it. So are you better off or are you just locked out faster if you don't have access to the Wi-Fi, if you don't have access to that legal literacy, if you don't have, the only access you have is to a person's phone, which might only 3% battery from a person who has a TikTok addiction. You could have whatever, but that's all you have access to. So from an access to justice perspective, technology is a good thing, but we can't ignore exactly what you said. Some people want to talk to a human being. And I think I read there was a generation, I don't know, with Gen whatever, right? I'm going to just pick one of them. And they particularly said with the banking apps that when banking apps were first being rolled out, everybody said, this is amazing. I don't have to go to my bank. I don't have to. And then bank branches started closing. And then they started moving them to post offices to run any kind of physical transactions. And people said, well, that's great because I didn't want to meet them. But then a generation came through and said, but sometimes I still want to talk to a person. So all these call centers that were being shut down, all these branches that were being shut down, then the banks had to revisit their positions and say, well, actually, we need to keep some lights on because sometimes you do want to talk to a person just to explain something because you didn't understand why this interest rate was higher than that and how do I get through the mortgage? And I gave you all my information, but you said it's still not great, or the face applications for government ID checks, etc. But I still think I'm doing it right. And it's not a stupid question. It could be a question or a fault within the system that nobody else has been aware of, but they're not seeing it as a fault. They're just saying, oh, this is an extra cost in order to allow people access to service. It's not even just access to justice, it's access to service. And I really like that there was a group of companies out there that are seeking to give access to justice in the context of using Gen AI, the LLM models, in helping you guide you through maybe a difficult thinking process around a landlord-tenant dispute or an immigration case, or where do I start finding information because I think I'm due something. So how do I go about doing it? And you don't know who to talk to. You don't even know how to even construct the question. And they're coming up with tools to at least allow you to do it, but it still requires you to have internet and some technology somewhere that access that web page or that app. So we would hope that that'll be something that we get better. Now I'll get off my soapbox. Nobody needs to this stuff. We want to hear from Stephanie.
But the other thing as well is the fact that you still So we've got these chat boxes and whatever, the free ones, but you still need to be able to construct whatever it is that you need to input in order for it to spit out what you want it to give you. And so I was somewhere the other day and somebody said to me, a very well old established institution, as soon as they sense that your application has been constructed by AI, they totally dismiss it. And I have an issue with that to start with, because
Harsh.
how do you discern, looking at some of the stuff that AI is pushing out, how do you discern that that has been constructed by AI as opposed to a human? So saying you're just going to, I mean, there are things that are obvious, but to say you're dismissing something that has been and won't even consider the application because it's been constructed by AI, it made me think about, what was the difference years ago? Because what some of us have said is that AI has leveled the playing field in some respect. Yeah.
Typos.
Yeah, absolutely. So we still have the grammar check, the spelling check, right? But also, back in the day, I remember lecturers saying to me that such and such handed in an essay. They could barely construct a sentence together, but yet they would submit this well-constructed, essay. And they knew most of the time they hadn't even written it. It was written by whomever, their parent, whatever. And so the level of that AI brings to the table is that for those who have been left behind or left out or whatever, they now have this tool that can help. So I found it quite a fascinating statement that this institution was just ruling people out without consideration if they had deemed that they had used AI. So I think, again, we need to get to a point where we find that balance as to, because we know people are using it. And I've heard so many different stories about the willingness actually for people to pay for some of this AI chat boxes and so forth, and how many they're using at the same time. The mind boggles.
It does. I think because the conversation, and there is legislation on this point as well, is about telling people that you've used AI in the delivery of a service, telling them that this article is written with the use or care of an AI tool. And that's coming up. You can see others in videos and on social media. There's this video, this advert has been using AI to do this. Most of the time you can tell because the people are far too happy looking and far too well dressed, and their hair is far too perfect to be real people. Even with the best catwalk models out there, it's no chance. Especially if they show the inside of an in-house lawyer's office and it's crystal clean and perfect and all that. No, that's AI. It's complete. Or they've never been inside an office in their life. But there are a myriad of reasons why somebody might want to use AI. Some people just, like I myself, will use it. Sometimes I will write an email and it's all connected. It's all on-prem. It's all secure, by the way, before anybody asks. I'll write an email. And the old-fashioned way was you write the email that you want to send but can't. You go away, you have your coffee or tea, nothing stronger. And then you come back and then you delete it. And then write the email you can send. Okay? Now it's faster because you write the email, you throw us one of the tools to say, rewrite this so I sound like a sensible, normal, caring, worthwhile human being, and please write it down. And then they come up and say, well, I'd take that out. I would never say that. And they just construct something. Yes, it's neutral. Yes, it might be quite bland, and it's using verbs that you'd never have thought of using in your life. But yes, fine. At least you're using it in a way that serves a purpose, because it's still only a tool.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And if there's a tool available, we shouldn't be told you can't use it unless you are using it for, or you're using it without eyes wide open as to all the risks pertaining to it. As you are talking about ethics, I'll talk about from the IP, from the data security perspective, from myriad of other things that everybody knows and has heard about. But let me talk, there was something that you also were talking about, which was around, and it's a topic that I really enjoy hearing from you, is around social mobility. So your journey, if I can say, coin it saying, from council estate to council chambers.
It's good.
It's an extraordinary journey that you took. And when I was thinking about it, I said, it's extraordinary, but why do I feel that it's exceptional? Because it shouldn't be exceptional. And thinking about it and talking to a few law professors, and they've said that what they're saying is a fewer entry level roles, and then there's rising costs. So how do we protect the kind of social mobility for the next generation?
It's an interesting one. And I was reading an article the other day. I'm probably going to paraphrase it very badly or even recollect what it said badly, but it was talking about social mobility. And actually, lots of organizations, companies have come out doing social mobility, but doing it an injustice, because what they're doing is they're picking the smartest of the most disadvantaged and positioning them and taking them on and so forth. And I probably would not have fallen in that cohort. Perhaps I was a late bloomer, or I wasn't in the top classes at school, maybe one, but I wasn't. And so for me, as I say, people who exclude themselves from rooms that they should be in, people who exclude people from rooms that they ought to be in. And I think for me, because I had that tenacity, that resilience, and I'm terrible at taking advice, and just decided that the more people told me I couldn't was the more I was determined that I could. That's what kept me going. But when an old family friend asked me a while ago, Stephanie, when you were growing up on the council estate, Prebendal Farm in Aylesbury, Buckinghamshire, did you think you'd become president of the Law Society of England and Wales? And of course not. I didn't even know what it was.
It wasn't cool enough to do that. You would never have said yes.
But I didn't even know. I mean, other than going home at dinner time as it was then, but during school, going home for dinner and seeing Crown Court on the TV, I didn't know a lawyer, didn't come across one. To have one in my midst, to be able to ask questions, ask for work experience and so forth. And so it's that bridge, if you like, that I spend my time now trying to say to people that let's look at those we put in positions of power and influence, because we seem to have, and anybody who's heard me speak know that I love to use this example, but I think it's the last 18 prime ministers since the Second World War in modern times. 14 of them have been the product of the University of Oxford, 3 of which did not go to university. Major, Churchill, and I think I always get this wrong, but is it Wilson or anyway, Callaghan, one out of the two, and Brown, who went to the University of Edinburgh. But if we are saying to our rising stars, rising cohort, that if you want to become Prime Minister of this country, go to University of Oxford and at least you're in with a chance. Because that's what we seem to be saying to people, that actually people we put in positions of power and influence, our judiciary, top rungs of our boardrooms and so forth, they have a particular background. And so my story should not be the exception, but unfortunately, that's what it is becoming. And to read the comments around the Legal Services Board in respect of our profession being inaccessible, being an elitist profession, we've done lots of work around this. Things have got better, but clearly we are not where we ought to be. And if we are to change the trajectory and raise aspirations amongst our young people, the next generation of leaders, we have to rewrite the story. And it should be an equitable playing field, that anyone, regardless of your background, regardless of where you started, you too can reach the top of your profession if you have the tenacity, the drive, the resilience, the determination, aptitude, all of those things to get ahead.
I agree. I think it's interesting when you were talking about the things that you needed. When I was starting off, it was like a race to get how many letters can you have at the end of your name. So I ended up, before landing one of the jobs I was always seeking and striving for, I had my BCL, my LLM, and a diplomas that I don't use today. I will admit I have no interest in doing applied finance law. I hated pensions, but it was the only way to get somebody to look at me, because I, like yourself, although different backgrounds, because I was raised in Ireland, the result was I had no connections, knew nobody was in law. And when I saw the first year's course of university in law, which, they said there was a word or a subject called tort. And I thought that was a typo. I didn't know what the typo could have been. But I had no idea what that meant. And then I did find a lawyer and asked them what it was, and they couldn't really explain it to me. So that didn't say very much. But it was... I do know it now, by the way, just to our listeners. But it's always very interesting that everybody knew that you had to have, and actually CVs at the time, people wanted to know where you lived because they wanted to know where you came from. They wanted to know what school you went to. That mattered. And then I fast forward, say, another 20 years, when I was revisiting some of these thought processes with a number of the firms even in Ireland, and I asked them about this and they said, oh no, we don't do that. Oh no, we don't do that anymore. We make it sure we don't. And then I asked people who work there and they said, oh yeah, we do.
Yeah, we do.
Okay, so nothing's changed. Okay.
But to the outside world, they will say that things have changed. But I've sat round tables where people are saying, such and such, can we sort out some work experience for my son, nephew, whoever, daughter, whatever. Those where people don't think that they're doing anything wrong because all they're doing is utilizing their networks, which is fine. But for those who do not have access, we are being left behind and talent is being wasted. And my point is that diversity is found every and anywhere, and so is talent. But of course, to borrow, I can't remember who said it, that of course, opportunity is not. And that is the main driver for me around social mobility, that actually it's about that equity. It's about giving opportunity or allowing people to see that opportunity exists for them too.
Agreed. And just to our listeners, for those, especially in the in-house roles, when you're looking to expand your teams, please remember Stephanie's points here. When you're going through a review process, I know it's, you'll have to deal with a HR team who's probably helping you find those individuals, but it is extremely important to kind of think of it in the technology context. If you're using any AI tools, there's an example which, it's a few years old, but it's an example, I think it was one of the big tech companies. I'm not going to name it just in case I get it wrong. But they had this office in the States and they had this great idea that they wanted to give local jobs to their office, close to those. They wanted to give it back to the local community. And so they told the algorithm that any CVs that comes in, and it's in the States, so it's any resumes come in, they have to make sure that it's in X mile radius or X kilometer radius. And the result was they got a lot of the same demographic, all kind of affluent, pale, pasty skinned individuals walking through, as I fall into that category. And they were all coming through and everybody's going, well, great, but this isn't quite what we were trying to do here. And they looked at it and they said, oh, the problem wasn't their intent. The problem wasn't what they were trying to achieve. And luckily they were spotting it by the interview process. But they just realized, oh, the radius as from the building didn't include any of those areas because they were the people, because your building was in the affluent, very expensive, exclusive business district, which is nowhere close to the people that you were trying to give opportunities to, based on merit, by the way, not based on tokenism. And so what was interesting is that they changed that in the algorithm, and lo and behold, they got a wide range of candidates to choose from. It doesn't mean that all the candidates came from those areas. It was because other people did come through and they came through on merit and their talent was seen in those interview processes. But at least they recognized and they could see, oh, hold on, we're using technology. Fantastic. Streamlines this whole process, but I can change because I now know why the technology did what it did. It wasn't its fault. It was because the humans who inputted the data got it wrong. And I really like that story is because they can shift and they get better talent for their own company. But then knowing that lawyers love to argue, but when... Not that I'm going to start an argument with you, Stephanie, I wouldn't win. It's because are we ready to lead when it comes to artificial intelligence? So we've got a lot of technology lawyers or lawyers that have been asked to write their AI policies for their company. And they've been asked to input across these new technologies and how they play out against the vast array of digital regulation that's out there for the UK, not so much, but, cross-border, European, US, etc., China, all that. We know it. It's a lot of work, a lot of thinking. So are we playing catch up with our technological cohort cousins, writing the rules and the code that we can't read as lawyers. And what I'm talking about is like we're debating about how to regulate AI, especially the UK. And meanwhile, AI is already writing the contracts, the scheduling the meetings. They're probably billing in 6-minute intervals in the law firms. So do you think that the legal profession is ready to shape AI's future? Or are we still too busy redlining contracts to notice that the robots are already in the boardroom?
I think there's bits of both camps. It is fair to say that tech has not been as disruptive in law as it has in financial services and medicine. But there are law firms out there, and indeed, not just law firms. I was at London Legal Tech Talk conference a couple of weeks back and shared a stage with a big startup company and other companies operating the space around legal tech. And the CEO said he's not a lawyer. So we've got people who are changing the game, if you like. But one of the things I cautioned about when others were talking about swarms of AI and super intelligence and so forth, was actually we have to remember why we as lawyers got into this work in the first place. We got into this because we wanted to make a difference, some of us anyway. The values that we sign up to, the codes of conduct and the oath of office that we have taken that we must adhere to. And so we have to be guardians of the rule of law and justice to ensure that the systems that we are working on, that we are perfecting, reflect the values of fairness, equality, and human dignity. And I know that lots of people have spoken about their worry or concern around tech being involved in justice and the law. But we should be, as I say, the guardians, the custodians of that to ensure that transparency, the accountability and fairness, and that there isn't this creep of bias and discrimination and so forth. And the other thing to remember, of course, is that we are a diverse profession, a diverse legal profession. We've got small firms, big firms, in-house, in academia and so forth. Geographically, we're diverse and so forth. And so while some of us are racing ahead with this technology, others have not even started to embrace it yet for a number of reasons. They will say they are busy practicing or the cost of it. And so let us share that knowledge, that wealth of information. But let's also think about, because we are going to have to get future ready and think about, so whilst clients are saying that we want, as I understand it, some clients are saying, if you use AI, we want to know about it, but we encourage you to use it because it's driving production, it's driving efficiency and effectiveness and so forth. But equally, people still want, and I don't believe that AI or tech is going to be to the detriment of lawyers, because they'll still want that human interaction. But we are going to have to change our game. I think billable hours is going to be a consequence of that as to how we will bill going forward. And we're going to have to learn new skills. And that's one of the initiatives that I'm going to be working on, remain slightly confidential for the moment, but working on in terms of getting the way that we are trained as lawyers and the skills that we need to upskill in are relevant to the technological revolution that we are in.
I love that. But can I take you into a kind of a bigger picture conversation now, because you've, in my mind, redefined what a leadership looks like in law. So if you were writing the playbook for the next generation, what's in, what's out, what's non-negotiable?
It's interesting because, somebody sat down next to me the other night at dinner and they said, as they were getting ready to leave their EDI job with one of the big law firms, and they whispered to me and they said, thank you for everything you are doing, everything you have done. And please, please, please continue to speak up and speak out. And I think far too often in our society, there are consequences for people who put their head above the parapet. And far too often, it is so much easier to not say anything because you're looking at the bigger picture in terms of where you perhaps want your career to go, the spaces that you want to be invited into. And I was asked this question when I was invited into a law firm to talk about the rule of law under Chatham House rules, nevertheless. But they said, having come out very vocally and spoken up against Boris Johnson's government when they were talking about lefty lawyers, and the fact that you don't have a position or a title, depending on what the title is, of course, but do you think that's a consequence of you speaking up? Of course, it's crossed my mind that if I had not spoken up, that maybe I sat somewhere now, chairing something or doing something within government. Of course, it's crossed my mind. But the point is, as I answered then, that in the stillness of the night, when I'm lying there with, it's my conscience that I'm there with, and I can sleep well. And I think that for the next generation coming up, you're obviously going to have to pace yourself. You're going to have to think about some of those rooms you're in. You're going to have to think about diplomacy and how you speak up and when you speak up. And all I say is read the room, know when to speak, because one of the attributes that I think of a great leader is actually sometimes you are the last person to speak, sometimes the quietest voice in the room. But when you speak, you hold the room, you command the room. So for the next generation coming up, the legal profession is changing. Technology is changing. Those who are coming into the profession are changing the way that we interact and the profession that we are. So I would say pace yourself, have a plan. Don't be afraid to speak up, but be mindful as to how you say it and the way you say it.
That's sage advice. I really appreciate this, Stephanie. As I do with all my guests, I ask them 2 very short questions, very simple. What's one thing about your work that people always get wrong?
What's one thing? More so in the beginning, when there was lots of talk about that I had assimilated, I had code switched. Let me be clear. Everybody belongs to or subscribes to a code. That is, whether it's the neighborhood we live in, the community we hang around in, the food we eat, the car we drive, whatever, the clothes, the labels we buy, we subscribe to a code. And I haven't assimilated. Have I played the game? Do I play by the rules? I play by my own rules, and I've learnt the game because I had to in order to get ahead. I absolutely have to. And there are things in the current geopolitical climate, there are things I would love to come out and say. But I recognize, going back to what I was saying earlier about that advice, I recognize that there is a time and there is a place and there is a way to say it. And some of that is through soft influencing skills done behind the scenes.
Thank you. My last question. What's one thing that's fun about your work?
Oh, taking pictures. Lots of them.
Take a picture. Now you have to explain that. What? Like take pictures of yourself? Lots of selfies?
No, not so much me. I'm terrible at selfies. But people who want to take a picture, and, I love the fact that people still want to take a picture with me. Sometimes they're not brave enough to ask, and that always tickles me. But the fact that people take pictures and they want to be, or want to have me in a picture, I always find that it's very grounding. And it's just a nice gesture that they want to do that.
Well, we can see a lot of our listeners now won't be shy
no,
anymore.
Ask away. And I'm happy for them to post it.
With the Stephanie Boyce, so you can do it. After all, she is a celebrity. I've seen her on GB News and watch out. No, but honestly, Stephanie, thank you so much for giving us your time. You're a history maker. You're a bridge builder. You're a relentless voice for justice. As I said, from a council estate to council chambers, you've shown us what leadership can look like: grounded, fearless, radically inclusive. And if you're wondering what the future of law, equity and AI looks like, chances are it sounds a lot like Stephanie. So from all of us at Beyond the Fine Print, stay curious, stay grounded, and step boldly beyond the fine print. Thank you. Thanks for listening to Beyond the Fine Print. If you've enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss the next episode. And if you have any burning questions you want us to cover in a future episode, send them to beyondthefineprint@rmoklegal.com. See you next time.